Welcome to Industry Focus, the podcast that dives into a different sector of the stock market every day. Today is Thursday, July 14th, 2016, so we're talking about energy, materials, and industrials. I'm joined by Motley Fool analyst and one-man snappy dresser and newly married Mr. Taylor Muckerman. How's it going, man?
It's married. Wonderful. Absolutely.
Welcome to the land of matrimony and bliss and all that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So
long time coming.
This was in Portugal.
It was.
Wow.
Hence the jersey today. I didn't get to
wear
wear it on Monday because I was still there.
Well, they just won too, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, representing. Good time, obviously?
Best time of my life.
Really?
Really.
Wow. That is what you want to hear from a guy after he gets married.
I keep having flashbacks.
Yeah.
Like withdrawal.
Why did you come back? You could have been
I had to, right? Work.
Right.
I love the Motley Fool.
Touche. We need to have your wife on the show now.
We'll talk to her about it. If you want to talk event planning or weddings or bar and bat mitzvahs, she'll be your girl.
She could be on the CG show because that's a big market.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, okay. So you've been gone for how many weeks? 2, 3?
I was out of the office for 2.5.
I forgot what you looked like.
I was out of the office for 2.5, but I was completely off the grid for a week and a half.
Got it. You missed some stuff.
I missed a couple episodes, yeah.
You missed a couple episodes.
Seems like it carried on without me.
Now that you're back, okay, so lots to cover today. We're actually going to we have to talk about this Tesla Autopilot crash that happened down in Florida last month. Mm-hmm. And for that, we have Motley Fool Senior Auto Specialist joining us. But first, Taylor, since you're back, we've got to talk about what Kinder Morgan's been up to.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. A couple different stories coming out of their camp lately.
Their CEO, Steve Keen, I don't know, this guy's got a private jet, I'm sure, but he's been pretty active
I don't know.
lately.
Kinder Morgan, they don't have private jets.
Oh, they don't?
No, that's one of the big things.
Oh, that's like
well,
he's a billionaire, right?
Well, Steve Keen, no, he
he's the CEO,
he's
the founder.
Rich
right.
Kinder is the billionaire, yeah.
He has the private jet.
Yep. Steve Keen, I actually interviewed him when he was the chief operating officer down in their Houston office a few years back, and seen him obviously take the next step and is the CEO now.
So can't wait to get your thoughts on this. Hit the wires last week. Kinder Morgan lined up the sale of, correct me if I'm wrong, half a pipeline that they own in the southeast United States.
Well, they own 50%, so they sold their whole stake.
Sold the whole rest of it. Okay. Yep. To the other owner, which was Southern Company, and it netted KMI $1.5 billion. What was interesting to me about this was the second it happened, everybody was like, oh, their financial troubles are over. They're going to be able to increase the dividend and all that stuff. I was not wowed by the size of this deal.
No, yeah. Compared to their debt load of over $40 billion,
it's like $49 billion. Yeah. It's like 3.5%.
Pretty substantial. Just about the same, more than their actual market cap is what their debt load is looking like. And this is something we've seen out of the company over the last month or so, that this is just one of multiple pipelines that they've sold completely out of or an interest in to another company. And they've also shelved multiple projects that they were thinking about moving forward with, just based on the fact that they didn't have as much buy-in from natural gas suppliers to flow through these pipelines. So the returns that they were expecting weren't justified.
They weren't there.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe back a few years ago during the heyday of Kinder Morgan spending a ton of money, they might have accepted a lower return, expecting that they could then fill the rest of the contracted amount that you could actually flow through. But now they're a little bit more hesitant because maybe they've reached their peak or maybe even gone beyond the peak of how big they actually should be.
Right. So the sale was announced, and it did not take long for Keen to come out and say that the company was very close, those are his words, to being able to reward shareholders via dividends or share buybacks. Does it seem to you like he's jumping the gun there? Because the proceeds, as I mentioned, represent 3.5%, 3.7% of their total debt load. Mm-hmm. The proceeds are just a little bit more than the company's entire free cash flow last year, mm-hmm. $1.3 billion. The dividend previously cost $4 billion before they cut it.
Right.
They do have some projects. They just got approved for that $4 billion project for the tar sands
mm-hmm.
up in Canada. I was like, you feel like a big swinger now again? Like, I don't...
Maybe on the share buyback side, but I don't know if a dividend...
Which I could see the argument for. It's down a bunch and everything.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I was just like, really? Like, what?
I don't know if I could justify, if I was the CEO, raising the dividend. It's still paying right around a 2.5% yield, so it's not... it's not a terrible yield. It's definitely not in the 4 to 7.5% range as it kind of bounced back and forth in between a couple years ago before they cut the dividend by 75% last year. But I don't know. It seems a little bit too early because even the energy industry hasn't fully recovered, much less Kinder Morgan itself.
Right. And not only that, but this doesn't, because I went back through Capital IQ and just looked at their cash flow statement. I just looked at the lines for debt issuances and debt issuances and debt retirements.
Mm-hmm.
They roll over $10 billion worth of debt every year, and they've done that for the last 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that's business as usual, and that's fine. That's kind of what these MLP and pipeline operators do. But I just could not see why the $1.5 billion made that big of a difference.
Yeah, you're right. It's just kind of a blip on the radar. And they've also kind of been downgraded in the credit sphere. So it'd be interesting to see what interest rates they get as the next tranche of debt retires. And
that's actually a good point. I'd be interested to see. They haven't hit the debt markets again, from what I know.
Yeah, not off the top of my head have I seen that either.
So after selling this half of the pipeline, Stephen Keen then attended a conference hosted by the EIA, the Energy Information Agency, where he said, this is interesting. He's obviously talking his own book, which he should do, but he talked about the ability of renewable energy sources to fulfill our energy needs is overblown, and we will need natural gas. He noted that environmentalists used to love natural gas, but have since said that it's no good because it too contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. I actually looked into this point. Do you know the carbon emissions that happen from natural gas and stuff off the top of your... Oh, you do?
No, I don't know. I know that it happens, and especially during the production process as well with flaring and whatnot.
Right. So I actually went to the EIA's website. They published this sort of thing. Pounds of CO2 emitted per million British thermal units, BTUs of energy for various fuels. Anthracite coals, 228.6 million. Diesel fuels, 161. Gasoline's 157. And at about half of coal is natural gas at 117. That's not... I mean, it's better. It's the best one on the list, but
it's still a fossil fuel.
Better.
Yeah, it's still a fossil fuel. But especially in America, you look at other countries that are like Canada, for instance. 60% of their power comes from hydropower, and that allows them to export the majority of the fossil fuels that they actually extract out of the ground, mainly to the United States. So we're a big purchaser of natural gas, not only from Canada but from other countries as well. Europe is still very reliant on natural gas, so it's going to be necessary for these big economies.
So you agree with him?
I don't know how long it's going to be like this major need for baseload power, because if you look at, like in Portugal where I was for my wedding, wind power is everywhere, solar power is gaining steam. They actually had 4 consecutive days in May this year that 100% of the energy used or electricity used in the country was produced by renewable energy.
Wow.
So you see countries like that, Germany, very, very high up on the wind scale. Denmark, I think almost 50% of their power comes from wind. So there are countries out there that are way ahead of the game in terms of renewable energy sources, but you're still talking about less than 50% in most cases from renewable sources. So if you want, it's the lesser of evils is what I'm trying to say in terms of coal or oil or natural gas for electricity generation, and it's plentiful.
So I know you're a huge bull on just natural gas pipelines for the reasons that you mentioned.
Maybe not the construction of more, but just the use of existing.
Them,
yeah, exactly. Yep.
So what do you think of shares of KMI these days?
They've come back since their lows, just along with the industry, and they were punished a little bit more than most because of the dividend cut and all the news around that. But the Motley Fool right now, in general, is feeling pretty good about it.
A lot of people in this building do like it.
It was Stock Advisor, Best Buy Now from Tom's side of the scorecard, the 1st of July, and then a week later, David named it as a Best Buy Now on his side of the scorecard in Stock Advisor. So it's a company that seems to have taken some steps. Maybe people's tone changes a little bit if they decide to hike the dividend a little bit too early, because then they could be right back where they were just a few months ago in retracing their steps. So it's an interesting story to follow, and it's one that the Motley Fool does believe in.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So for our next segment, as I mentioned, we had to talk about this Autopilot death. It seems like it's at the top of my Google News feed every day. So joining us to talk about it is Motley Fool senior auto specialist John Rosevear. How is it going, John?
It's going well, and we've got a lot to talk about today.
Yeah, so let's dive in. So just kind of rehash, Tesla owner named Joshua Brown died in a collision on May 7th with a 18-wheeler tractor trailer down in Florida. But I wanted to actually take a step back, and can you take us to school and tell us what the heck is Autopilot?
Okay, Autopilot is, and it's essentially an enhanced cruise control. It's a set of several driver assistance systems that together work like an enhanced cruise control. It uses cameras, radar, ultrasonic sensors, and some fancy Tesla software. In Tesla words, what it does is automatically steer down the highway, change lanes, and adjust speed in response to traffic. It's intended to, and again, these are Tesla words, help the car avoid hazards and reduce the driver's workload. So it's not really a self-driving system. It's kind of one step past sort of the latest and greatest adaptive cruise control and lane keeping systems you might get on really any mainstream luxury car, and even some more mass market models. I mean,
Right.
You can load up a Ford Fusion with most of this stuff, for instance.
There's an idea right there.
Yeah,
Did you read that Dan Sparks piece last year where he drove like what 60 or 90 miles? Do you remember, Taylor, in his Tesla in Colorado?
I did, and he's far from the only one doing this kind of stuff, and that's kind of the issue. It's Tesla will tell you officially you're not supposed to take your hands off the wheel, but Tesla owners are early adopters.
Just check YouTube.
Yeah,
I was just going to say they have access to webcams.
Yeah.
It's all out there. It really is.
So can you run down really quick just the basic details of the accident?
Okay, so this gentleman, Mr. Joshua Brown, he was 40 years old in Florida, owned a Tesla Model S. On May 7th, he was cruising at some speed on a road in Florida, and a tractor trailer made a left turn in front of him. It appears that his car never slowed down and hit the trailer broadside, with very bad results. Essentially, the top of the car was sheared off. I've seen pictures of it.
Yeah.
Poor Mr. Brown. Our condolences to his family, et cetera. That was a really nasty one. Tesla was not able, they say, to access the car's computer remotely because of the damage. They eventually sent an investigator to Florida to look at it, took all of the data from the car that they could download, took it home to headquarters, processed it, and discovered in late May that Autopilot was engaged. They had reported it to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration sometime before. They gave them that information, and then towards the end of June, the federal agency said they were opening an investigation into this, and that's when Tesla disclosed it.
Got it. So this actually occurred before that big stock raise that Tesla did at the end of May. We're not going to talk too much about that. Obviously, that's up in the air, and we spend days going to sleep talking about SEC disclosure rules. So what's going on with the investigations? Because obviously, this is of note. This is the first major death that I've heard of for a driverless or semi-driverless system.
It is the first major death. It is the first fatal accident in which a system that does this much is implicated. Certainly the first one for Tesla's Autopilot system, which is really, like I said, a bit of a step ahead of everybody else, mostly because it will steer for you. It will change lanes automatically, which the other systems will not yet do. What's going on? The investigation's in fairly early stages. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, which is part of the Department of Transportation, it's the main safety regulator when it comes to cars in the U.S. They sent Tesla a letter earlier this week or at the end of last week, demanding a whole ton of information. Basically, they want to know details for every car you've sold in the U.S. with Autopilot enabled. When have the various safety systems been employed? When is it?
Oh, wow.
When and how many times have they had to brake automatically, remind when and how many times has it had to remind the owner to put the hands on the wheel, what percentage of the miles is, that the car has been done under autopilot, et cetera, and they want it all in a spreadsheet, and they want it all soon. So Tesla's going to have to do that, and I think this is the first time that the federal government has tried to really grapple with a system that's actually shipping. I mean, they've been talking about setting rules and guidelines going forward with self-driving systems as we move toward that, but Tesla shipped this thing, and it's out there, and there's something like 70,000 cars out there with this system operational that have activated autopilot. And now the feds are coming in and saying, okay, we need to take a look at this and maybe start to set some rules and give some guidance and maybe put some limits on what Tesla's done.
Yeah. So Taylor, what did you think when you first heard about the story and then the stock offering and all that?
Yeah. My first thought was that it's already been scaled back to some degree because last year people, like we mentioned, YouTube videos of people climbing into the back seat of their Tesla, leaving the driver's seat completely empty on the highway. Is that a ghost riding
the whip thing?
Yeah, pretty much. And so Elon Musk actually came out in the public sphere and kind of voiced his opinion of humans shouldn't be trusted just yet with fully autonomous cars. So I believe they scaled back a little bit on what they had made available to folks in terms of the vehicle capabilities. I am a big believer that autonomous driving is gonna take place in the next 1 or 2 decades. I hope it does, but this is obviously proof that we're just not quite ready for it to be fully autonomous, and maybe there just needs to be a little bit more training or instruction involved in how to use it. But then again, Elon Musk isn't riding shotgun with every single person with the Tesla, so there has to be some level of trust involved with the purchaser and their decision making. Unfortunately, humans are humans, and we all operate a little bit differently when it comes to this.
So, John, a bunch of auto executives and just players in the industry. What has been your feel for the rest of the auto industry's opinion about what happened and the advent of driverless cars and what it's going to take to prove viability of actually having a driverless automobile?
Well, first of all, if you go to a big automaker and you talk to the people who are doing their self-driving research and development and so forth,
and they all are,
and you get them away from a camera.
If they aren't, they won't be a car company for long.
Yeah,
no, that's mostly true. And you get them away from a camera and you start asking them. They say, Tesla released this thing too early. It's crazy it's a beta system. The transitions between the different parts of the system aren't seamless. It's a beta system. It's got holes in it, as you'd expect. And there's a concept here with cars that have partial self-driving capability about handoff, and the handoff problem, they call it, meaning that when the car goes, bing, driver, you need to take over, it takes several seconds for somebody who's maybe been reading a book or whatever to sort of refocus on the task at hand.
Just like texting and driving. I mean, that's the main crux of that whole issue is that you think you can look up fast enough, but you're still got to catch your bearings.
Right. And that few seconds could mean the difference between life and death.
Yes.
Right. But the thing is, the thinking is they got to build this into the system to anticipate this.
Wow.
So that the car, gives you enough time to switch your attention back to the road. This is something that Consumer Reports talked about. They came out this morning and said, we think Tesla needs to dial this down. And they had a bunch of concerns, which we can talk about. But that's kind of the issue. We aren't going to get to full autonomy for years yet. It's going to take billions of miles of testing. It's really going to take cars that talk to each other, super detailed maps of roads, all of that to get fully autonomous cars. But we will see, and Tesla's Autopilot is maybe the first sort of rough step in that direction. There will be many more over the next few years. Partial autonomy systems that will automate highway driving. But again, when you talk to the big companies and the people working on these, there's a lot more care going into this than they think Tesla put into it. It's possible, it's possible that Tesla would come back and say, "Hey, we put a lot of care into it," and they would say that. But more concern around the handoff points when you hand it back to the driver, making sure everything works seamlessly, making sure you really have enough sensors. I know that there was an industry insider blog that published some quotes from Toyota engineers shortly after Autopilot started shipping, where they said, we don't really think Tesla has the sensors on the car to be doing. No, hear me out. Lane changing safely. That you need, several different radar sensors or a LiDAR sensor, stuff that isn't really commercially available yet to do this. And they're like, even when we get the sensors, which is probably going to be a couple years from now, we're not even going to ship it for a while because we got to test it.
Well, that kind of makes sense based on the story, right? Because Tesla's basically saying that the car couldn't discern whether it was a truck or just a bright sky, right? Because it was a white tractor trailer.
Yes, right. That they've got radar and other systems, a camera system looking forward, and then it was confused because it's a white tractor trailer. To which, I've had people in Detroit texting me over the last couple of days saying, "Are you kidding me?" But sure enough, the system missed it, right? Yeah. And this is where we say there's a system called LiDAR that uses that bounces lasers off things to give a car or some other vehicle a very detailed view of its environment at all times. A lot of the automakers say LiDAR systems are key to real self-driving cars, and there's a lot of effort going into developing better ones, more affordable ones, and so forth that can be installed. Elon Musk says, we don't need LiDAR. We can, make up the difference with software and really good maps and so forth. And there's some question now as to whether he might have to rethink that before going any further with Autopilot.
Got it. So before we wrap up here, bottom line, I guess we can just go around the table. Is this critical for Tesla? Do I need to run and sell any shares that I fictionally own?
I'll take the first step so we can let John close us out. But personally, I don't think so. It's something that Tesla could cease for at least the time being, because these updates can all be done over the Wi-Fi in your own home. But I don't think it's. If you look at Volkswagen, for instance, they're not getting killed, and they have to
pay $15 billion.
Exactly. So granted, they're a much larger company, but this can be fixed. I feel much easier than. Something that Volkswagen or Toyota with their braking issues a year or two ago had to deal with. So I don't think this is any reason to sell the stock.
Got it. Yeah, the other fact that, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, my understanding is the guy was actually watching a movie when he...
We don't know that for sure.
Okay, all right.
There was a DVD in the car or something like that. We don't know that for sure.
I'll back off of that point. But I just, to Taylor's point, it definitely does seem like this isn't critical, but I would like to see some credence given to public opinion and maybe dialing some of this back a little bit.
Yeah. I think Tesla needs a little bit more answers other than the car got confused between a truck and a...
And then saying, do the math. Yeah. Anyway. And John?
I think this is growing pains. Tesla is this scrappy Silicon Valley startup, and as they get bigger, they're becoming a car company. And the other big automakers are like, okay, guys, if you're going to be a big car company, you got to play like a big car company. You got to test like a big car company. You got to, approach the regulators like a big car company. So this is a lot of what I'm hearing from people in the industry. Is this going to kill Tesla? Absolutely not. Will the NHTSA come back and say, okay, you got to do more or less what Consumer Reports is calling on you to do, which is, for instance, disable the auto steering function until you can make sure people are keeping their hands on the steering wheel. And maybe stop calling it autopilot, because it's not really an autopilot
That
yet.
is a little misleading.
It could be a little bit misleading, yeah. And maybe this instance, as unfortunate as it is, lends a little bit of caution to the early adopters that own Teslas and that use this technology, because it's not mandatory. You don't have to use it. These people are choosing to use it. It is a risk. That's what risks are naturally inherent in being an early adopter. So maybe people use a little bit more caution, even if Tesla doesn't scale back anymore.
For sure.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think that will happen. One more point about the early adopters. Tesla's gearing up to sell 500,000 cars a year in a few years. They're about to move past the early adopters.
Yes.
And the well-heeled techies who've mostly been Tesla's audience so far, they get what a beta system is. They get the system's rough, it's got limits. That's fine. They're cool with that. When my mom or your mom or whoever buys a Tesla, somebody more mainstream who isn't a professional techie, who isn't a software person, it's got to work, period, every
Awesome.
time.
Most beta systems usually don't involve death. So this is much more serious.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for your time, John.
All right. Thank you. My pleasure.
And that is it for us, folks. If you're a loyal listener and have questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. Just email us at industryfocus@fool.com. Once again, that's industryfocus@fool.com. And as always, people in this program may have interest in the stocks that they talk about, and the Motley Fool may have formal recommendations for or against those stocks, so don't buy or sell anything based solely on what you hear on this program. For Taylor Markman, I am Sean O'Reilly. Thanks for listening, and Fool on.